Welcome back to Conveniently Unspoken, the channel that delves into the hidden narratives of history. In this episode, we explore the intriguing instances of President Andrew Jackson's relentless battles against central banks that may have been founded and funded by elite families rumored to be part of secret societies such as the Illuminati. Join us as we uncover the untold stories of how one man's crusade shaped America's financial landscape and challenged the hidden powers of his time. Andrew Jackson, the seventh President of the United States, is famously known for his strong opposition to central banks, particularly the Second Bank of the United States. His fight against central banking institutions became a defining aspect of his presidency and had a lasting impact on American economic policy. The Second Bank of the United States, chartered in 1816, was a federally chartered bank that aimed to stabilize the American economy and regulate currency and credit. The Second Bank was a national bank. However, it did not serve the functions of a modern central bank. It did not set monetary policy, regulate private banks, hold their excess reserves, or act as a lender of last resort. The primary sources of funding for the bank were both the federal government and private investors, including individuals and corporations. The federal government invested directly in the bank and held a substantial stake in its operations. This government investment was intended to provide stability to the bank and give it a strong foundation to fulfill its financial responsibilities. 20% of the bank's capital was owned by the federal government, the bank's single largest stockholder, 3-4. To supplement the government's investment, the Second Bank of the United States also sought funding from private individuals and corporations. Private subscriptions allowed private investors to purchase shares in the bank, providing it with additional capital to support its operations. 4,000 private investors held 80% of the bank's capital, including 3,000 Europeans. One of these private investors was the patriarch of the Astor family, John Jacob Astor, who at the time was the wealthiest man in America and the first multimillionaire in American history. Foreign holdings of the Second Bank of the United States grew from just under 30,000 shares in 1820 to over 84,000 shares in 1832. James de Rothschild of France was rumored to be a principal investor in the new central bank. This gave the Rothschild family another taste of owning the United States money supply, as they had been principal investors in the First National Bank as well. As a private corporation with public duties, the bank handled all fiscal transactions for the U.S. government and was accountable to Congress and the U.S. Treasury. In its time, the institution was the largest moneyed corporation in the world. However, it faced fierce opposition from President Jackson, who believed it was an unconstitutional concentration of power and a tool of the wealthy elite. The Second Bank of the United States, established in 1816, was intended to be a financial institution that would promote economic stability and regulate currency and credit. However, throughout its existence, the Second Bank faced a range of problems and controversies that contributed to its eventual demise. Here are some of the key problems associated with the Second Bank of the United States. 1. Lack of transparency and accountability. Critics argued that the Second Bank operated with a lack of transparency and accountability. The bank's operations and decision-making processes were often opaque, leading to suspicions of favoritism and corruption. This lack of transparency eroded public trust and fueled opposition. 2. Concentration of power. Opponents of the Second Bank, including President Andrew Jackson, contended that the institution concentrated too much power in the hands of a few elites. They believed that the bank's influence extended beyond its intended role of regulating currency and credit, and that it wielded undue control over the nation's financial system. 3. Allegations of political manipulation. The bank became entangled in partisan politics, with some accusing the bank's leadership of manipulating financial policies to benefit certain political factions. This perception of political maneuvering further eroded public confidence in the bank's integrity. 4. Unequal access to credit. Critics argued that the Second Bank favored certain commercial and business interests, granting them easier access to credit and financial resources. This unequal distribution of credit contributed to economic inequality and hindered the growth of smaller, local businesses. 5. Conflict with state-chartered banks. The Second Bank often clashed with state-chartered banks over issues such as regulatory authority and credit distribution. Many state-chartered banks felt that the second bank undermined their autonomy and interfered with their operations, leading to tensions between the federal institution and state governments. 6. Economic fluctuations. The bank's attempts to regulate the economy and prevent financial crises were not always successful. Periods of economic instability and financial fluctuations persisted during the bank's existence, leading some to question its effectiveness in fulfilling its stated objectives. 7. Unpopular policies. Certain policies implemented by the second bank were met with public resistance and opposition. For example, the bank's decision to tighten credit in 1818, leading to a contraction of the money supply, was criticized for exacerbating economic downturns. 8. Constitutional concerns. Opponents of the second bank, including President Jackson, raised constitutional concerns about the bank's existence. They argued that the bank exceeded its enumerated powers under the Constitution and encroached on the rights of individual states. 9. Jackson's veto and bank war. Perhaps the most significant problem the second bank faced was President Andrew Jackson's strong opposition. In 1832, Jackson vetoed a bill to recharter the bank, setting off a fierce political and ideological battle known as the Bank War. Jackson's campaign against the bank led to a decline in its influence and eventual demise. Jackson vehemently opposed the bank, viewing it as a dangerous concentration of power. He believed it benefited the wealthy at the expense of ordinary citizens. In an unprecedented move, Jackson vetoed the recharter bill, arguing that the bank was unconstitutional and contrary to the principles of limited government. Failing to secure a recharter, the second bank became a private corporation in 1836 and underwent liquidation in 1841. In his veto message, President Jackson questioned the legitimacy of central banks and their potential to accumulate excessive power. He argued that such institutions could threaten the democratic principles upon which the nation was founded. Here are a few passages from President Jackson's veto message.
Having considered it with that solemn regard to the principles of the Constitution which the day was calculated to inspire, and come to the conclusion that it ought not to become a law, I herewith return it to the Senate, in which it originated, with my objections. I sincerely regret that in the act before me I can perceive none of those modifications of the bank charter which are necessary, in my opinion, to make it compatible with justice, with sound policy, or with the Constitution of our country. It enjoys an exclusive privilege of banking under the authority of the general government, a monopoly of its favor and support, and, as a necessary consequence, almost a monopoly of the foreign and domestic exchange. The powers, privileges, and favors bestowed upon it in the original charter, by increasing the value of the stock far above its par value, operated as a gratuity of many millions to the stockholders. In another of its bearings this provision is fraught with danger. Of the 25 directors of this bank, 5 are chosen by the government and 20 by the citizen stockholders. From all voice in these elections the foreign stockholders are excluded by the charter. In proportion, therefore, as the stock is transferred to foreign holders the extent of suffrage in the choice of directors is curtailed. Already is almost a third of the stock in foreign hands and not represented in elections. It is constantly passing out of the country, and this act will accelerate its departure. The entire control of the institution would necessarily fall into the hands of a few citizen stockholders, and the ease with which the object would be accomplished would be a temptation to designing men to secure that control in their own hands by monopolizing the remaining stock. There is danger that a president and directors would then be able to elect themselves from year to year, and without responsibility or control manage the whole concerns of the bank during the existence of its charter. It is easy to conceive that great evils to our country and its institutions might flow from such a concentration of power in the hands of a few men irresponsible to the people. I have now done my duty to my country. If sustained by my fellow citizens, I shall be grateful and happy; if not, I shall find in the motives which impel me ample grounds for contentment and peace.
President Jackson took the fight against central banks a step further by ordering the removal of federal deposits from the Second Bank of the United States. The funds were distributed to state-chartered banks, known as pet banks, which were believed to be more accountable to local interests. This move, known as the Bank War, significantly diminished the bank's power and influence. Jackson's actions in removing the federal deposits from the second bank were met with opposition from his own cabinet, including his Secretary of the Treasury, William J. Duane. When Duane refused to comply with Jackson's directive, he was eventually replaced with Roger B. Taney, who was more supportive of Jackson's policies. Jackson's opposition to the Second Bank of the United States reflected his broader commitment to the principle of limited government and states' rights. His actions reinforced the idea that government institutions should not have unchecked power over the economy. His unwavering stance against financial concentrations of power and secretive organizations challenged the status quo and shaped America's financial landscape. However, the expiration of the Second Bank's charter in 1836 contributed to economic instability in the years that followed. The absence of a central banking system led to a fragmented and volatile financial landscape, contributing to economic fluctuations and financial crises. Join us next time on Conveniently Unspoken as we continue to unravel the untold stories of history, shedding light on the enigmatic figures and events that have shaped our world. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell to be part of this journey of discovery. And remember, the truth may be conveniently unspoken, but it's worth seeking.